Just south of Richmond, Virginia, along Jefferson Davis Highway, sits a trailer park known as Shady Hill. It's a community of a few hundred people that has historically been beset by poverty, drugs, and crime. Trailer homes are small dwellings to begin with, but here, some of them are divided into sections of 3. There are some families with children here living in an area that's not much bigger than a rich person's closet. But one of the many trailer homes in this development is the neighborhood space for learning, community, and prayer. It's the Cornerstone Revitalization Center, a faith-based nonprofit started in 2005 by members of Cornerstone Assembly of God. What started as a few members praying over the neighborhood has become a multifaceted ministry that has built community and transformed lives. My visit with the Cornerstone Revitalization Center was just one part of a larger sabbatical study funded by the Louisville Institute, in which I sought to discover how ordinary churches were finding ways to engage in this long-term investment approach to ministry. You can find other stories at this link, as well as an introductory video that explains what Christian community development is and gives a broad overview of my project. As with many of these ministry efforts, you can't fully explain how Cornerstone Assembly of God came to base their outreach efforts here in this trailer park. It started with passion, paying attention to God's nudging, and being in the right places at the right times. I sat down and talked with Dawn King, a board member of the center, and Rowena Hall, who is one of the pastoral leaders at Cornerstone Assembly of God.
Involved in this neighborhood because a young couple from our church went to the Dream Center in Los Angeles on a mission trip and saw the work that was being done in Los Angeles. They came back home and said, you know, we could be doing something here in our own community. So they would drive by here all the time, going to work and coming back, and God just showed them this neighborhood. And they stopped one day and began to just pray, and before that, you know what, they were just prayer walking through this community, handing out fruit, trying to meet people in the community. Then they came back to our church pastor and said, you know, we'd like to start something here like they do in the Dream Center. And so that's how it all began.
So it all started with simple prayer and developing relationships. As you might imagine, it didn't happen quickly or easily.
Oh yeah, we definitely, even the ownership here, we're very questionable about our motives and why are you here, why do you want to help people, and residents also, you know, I don't know you, why are you here? And so lots of that, lots of discouragement along the way, and so I think prayer walking also was an encouragement to those of us that were walking and praying that God was continuing to bring us here.
Over time, people in the church began to develop deeper relationships of trust with the neighbors. And over a period of several years, they had the chance to learn what the deepest needs and challenges were in this community. Their earliest efforts involved having parties and socials that fostered community and mentoring and tutoring with the many children that live here. But they soon found that they wanted to do more. And much of what they wanted to see happen needed funding and community partnerships that were just not available to an effort that is strictly that of a church. It also threatened to drain all of the church's time and energy.
We kept running into, well, we can't do this because it's the church. The church can't do this. The church isn't able to support this. And so it was recommended that we form this nonprofit, and so we did, with a lot of sweat and tears and on my part. And but once we had that, really it's that platform that we can be a multi-church. It's not just Cornerstone. It is that main means of collecting grants or other kinds of funding. And so it's been, sometimes there's still a fine line of, well, is this CRC or is this the church? We couldn't get the Altria grant or even apply for it because we were a church. Sometimes we still have those blocks because we are a faith-based nonprofit, but the limitations are a little bit fewer. and certainly doesn't matter to the residents here, whether it's CRC or Cornerstone. It's just our friends. You know, these are our friends and we are their friends.
Today, the Cornerstone Revitalization Center includes a sports program, a ministry to women, ESL classes, and more. As I discuss in the introductory video of this project, one key component of community development ministries is partnerships. Dawn and Rowena pointed to their Big Pal Little Pal mentoring program as an example of how these ministry efforts can be the catalyst for bringing communities together and recruiting skilled help that may not be present just within their church.
We've had some people here for our Big Pal Little Pal, which is our mentoring, tutoring sessions, just to see the people that have poured their lives into these children here, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, reading to them with math. Some of them are housewives, some of them are senior citizens that come out here, former teachers that just give their lives, and when you talk to them, they say, oh, this is such a blessing for me. They've enjoyed it so much that they just keep coming back, and then when you meet the kids, you fall in love with them anyway.
There was also another partnership that enabled them to more directly meet the needs of the children they served, a partnership with the public schools.
We want to make sure that what we're doing is going to support what they're doing at the school, and not that we're on our own just trying to put band-aids on things. We want to make sure that we're addressing the root problems. And so having a relationship with the schools has been huge to really understand what each student is facing, not just a blanket, let's just help with homework kind of thing.
Meanwhile, the residents of Shady Hill began to see Cornerstone as a place of spiritual help and refuge. One gentleman from the church found this out when he went to the Cornerstone trailer one night to retrieve something. And although he wasn't supposed to be there by himself and he could have run into trouble, something inspiring happened.
He walked out of this room and 3 guys came up to him, and they were pretty scary looking guys, and he was getting a little nervous, and it was close to dark, and the 3 guys walked up to him and said, hey, can you pray with us? They already knew that that's what this trailer stood for.
The Cornerstone Ministry has another feature that I found elsewhere in my research. As these ministries begin bringing people together to help foster a sense of community where people were previously living in isolation, and as people begin to take more ownership in their neighborhood, there is usually a distinctive positive effect that city leaders especially appreciate.
It's hard to shoot somebody that you've shared a meal with at the picnic that afternoon, you know, so that's why, you know, we try and do everything with the community. And I think when we first came in here, they didn't think of themselves as a neighborhood, and now they do. The statistics show from the police department that the calls for police in this area has dropped. They used to have calls every hour on the hour almost, because a lot of drugs, things going on in this neighborhood.
And there still is crime, but the crime is different. The crime now is not that violent, armed robbery, murder, that kind of thing. And obviously it makes sense if you have more families, the crimes that they're seeing now are more domestic. We also have that partnership with the police department, that they know what we're doing in the community, and therefore it makes sense. It makes sense to them, it's making sense to us, that the crimes that we have, and they can support us and say, you know, well, you really ought to talk to, and so that has been a positive.
I have a favorite story that they shared. There was a woman in the neighborhood named Cloud. Every time Cornerstone would host an event for the neighbors, Cloud would sit under a tree, usually under the influence of something, and yell at or taunt the people from the church. On one occasion, she even threw bottles at them. But during one event, after they had been there a while, Dawn felt like she needed to take a risk.
I felt very led to go and sit with her under that tree, and when I did, something in her softened immediately, and within an hour's time she was really, really broken before the Lord. And just from a conversation with me about life and how life can stink sometimes, and just just really, we were just spending some time together, and it was in those last moments that she looked at me and thanked me for sitting with her, and I asked her if she would like to know Jesus in a deeper way, and was able to pray that sinner's prayer with her that day. And she went home that night and cleared out her apartment of all alcohol, drugs, and has been sober ever since. And she has missed very few Sundays from church, and has joined our church and is a key member there, and is definitely our resident hero here in the community. She has opened her own business in the last couple of years, and probably could live in another place now. She's stable enough that she could move out of this community, and has very specifically chosen to stay here. She feels she belongs here and that she has something to offer to this community. We're very blessed by her.
And she now runs our pantry, our food pantry, and so when we give groceries out, she knows who really needs groceries and who doesn't, because she lives here. And guys that come to get groceries that she said, "Oh no, I saw you buying beer, a whole case of them. No, you don't need groceries." And she's the only one that can say that to the people, because she lives here.
Christian community development is about empowering the neighbors themselves, and this is a classic, albeit unusual, example of this. There are many people who could have potentially run Cornerstone's food pantry, but this lady from the neighborhood, who would have easily and perhaps even justifiably been written off, is the ideal person to do it. Her dignity has been restored, and her life has been transformed. Interestingly, the leaders of Cornerstone became aware of Christian community development late in the process. They met Wendy McCaig and became acquainted with Embrace Richmond. They've realized that they were already implementing some of its principles by instinct, but have work to do in other areas.
We don't need to be taking care of everybody. We need to be fostering that idea of independence and developing that idea of leadership from within the community. And I think that's going to be our biggest focus, is how are we going to foster us not being as needed, and growing that idea that there are people here who desire and want the same things that we want, and that we can empower them.
This ministry has been very successful and continued to grow. And when I asked Dawn and Rowena about why they think this is so, they first pointed to the fact that it has, from the very beginning, been bathed in prayer and a passion for God's people. But they also pointed to another factor: the flexibility and open minds of their leaders.
It's not like, okay, we've got this program, let's do it like this from now on forever. I think every single person that's on our team has this open mind of, now I know there's a way we can do this better. Even though it's working, what we're doing now, but we can always do better, and let's go to a conference and find out some new ideas.
I concluded the interview by asking these women what they've learned and how they would encourage other Christian leaders who might want to do this kind of work. And they offered this.
And just because you don't see things happening immediately doesn't mean that God isn't working here. It's a slow process. Cloud sat under that tree in the neighborhood for 2 years making fun of us before she came to the Lord. And we don't know, only God knows all the seeds that are planted in people's hearts.